All right, as we look back at this past year, I want to start off with some numbers. The Free Press just did a poll taking a look at how Detroiters feel in this past year since Detroit's emerged from bankruptcy. 69% of them thought the city was headed in the right direction. I want to get your reaction to that number. And what do you think specifically, some specific changes that have happened over the past year that you believe has influenced that number of 69%?
You know, I think people are getting confidence that city government can be managed. I mean, for a long time here, you drive down the street and the lights were out, there was trash everywhere, graffiti covering buildings, ambulances wouldn't come for an hour. And I think it's been the cumulative effect of the services. But now ambulances are showing up in 9 minutes, half of what they were 2 years ago, and people know that. Nearly all the street lights have been replaced in the city. The parks were cut all summer. And I think there's a growing feeling that city government can run well. And don't discount the impact of the economic growth. The unemployment rate's gone from 19% to 13% in the last couple of years. So we got a ways to go. State average is still 5%, but there are a lot more people working today than there were 2 years ago, and I think that's helping as well.
I want to talk a little bit about city services, because it was interesting because this Free Press poll again said 48% of people say that city services are about the same, and 44% believe they're better. So you've got a bit of a close area that that people are seeing something.
Well, only 5% think they're worse. You go back 2 years, and
the number's totally different.
Yeah, they were. And it depends on where you are and what you're talking about on your services. I don't think anybody, if you take a look at streetlights, our numbers are showing more than 80% of the city believes the streetlights are better. Now, if you're in a neighborhood where there's 3 occupied houses and 10 unoccupied houses, the fact the streetlights are on and the police and fire are showing up are good, but it isn't the most overriding factor in your mind as you go out of your house in the morning. And so, you know, we have a lot of work to do in the city, no question about it.
Talk about some of that work that remains. Look forward to 2016, 2017. What are the things that you think you'll be able to get to that maybe people haven't seen yet?
You know, I'm going to spend a huge amount of time in 2016 on the crime rate. And Chief Craig and I have in the last 6 months spent a great deal of time together. You're seeing the violence came down significantly in the second half of the year. I think the Chief's doing a great job. Poll shows the public agrees with that. You're going to see us start to bring technology to fighting crime in a way this city hasn't seen before. And so I think you're going to start to see the violence come down faster even than it has. And we're talking to the federal government about major programs to renovate vacant houses with rent subsidies to take people who are either homeless or people who might be in really dilapidated homes and move them into neighborhoods that are decent neighborhoods that have some vacant houses. And so I think filling in the housing for our lower income folks and getting the violence down, probably going to be the 2 big pushes.
When you hear from people who are unhappy, and of course there are still some, and some very vocal, angrily unhappy about what happened to the city and what's happening now, what's your answer to that frustration? And a lot of them are saying, maybe not in explicit terms, that they just aren't feeling the effects of what's happening. It's not gotten to their neighborhood yet. It's not touched their lives.
You know, at least once a week, I sit in a living room in a neighborhood, and I hear this firsthand from people, and I always break it down into the conversation. I haven't been any place in the city where they didn't say, "You're right, my park was cut this last summer, but look at the 6 dead trees on this block, look at the 4 vacant houses, and look at the storm drains with the water backed up." And they're right. And so I don't think people expect it to be solved in 1 or 2 years, but we're well aware of how far we have to go, and we're working at it hard every day.
I want to talk a little bit about public safety, go back to where you were talking about the police force. And you've talked about response times and how they've dropped significantly over the past year. Do you think response times is the best way to measure the performance of the police department right now?
I think response times are a major factor in the approval rating you're seeing on Chief Craig. So, you know, we had a time there where it was a long time when you called 911. Now we're typically getting there in 14 to 15 minutes. So it's a help, but the answer, we have a lot more to do than that. Of course, part of my problem is we've got 220 vacancies in police officers' positions. We have the money in the budget for it. It's not a money issue, but when you were paying $31,000, we couldn't recruit cops. Last week, We had all three police unions agree to a new contract that's going to raise the starting police wages to $36,000. I've studied carefully what New York did to get their murder rate from 4,000 murders in 1991 to 400 today. They added police, they used technology, and they had a sustained strategy that year after year the homicides dropped from the previous year. And the chief and I have completely embraced that, and I think you're going to see results.
The Detroit News had a really human story over the weekend about the effect of the water shutoffs on people in the city. And I know under the agreement you don't control the water department the way that the mayor's office did before. It's under regional authority. But the effect of that is on your citizens, the people who elected you. Talk about how we address that kind of suffering. I know that there's affordability plans and all kinds of things, but the story made clear that's not getting to everybody. There are people dealing without water.
And that story was a very powerful story, I thought. And that piece of it actually is about to come back to me. The local aspect of the water department by January will be ours. There were two things about it. One of the stories, the individuals, the water program worked. He got put on a payment plan and his water was turned back on. The other story, you had a woman living in very dire situations who was squatting in a house that she wasn't in legally, couldn't get water on. And I looked at that and said, this isn't a water issue. This is a failure of our social services network. And so we are on it now, but we have significant affordable housing programs going in this city. And the question is, why did we not know about this citizen earlier? Why didn't we move to get her out of the house she was squatting in into legitimate housing? So I didn't see that as a water story. I saw that as a failure of our safety net, and we're attacking it from that standpoint. And Gary Brown, when he saw the story, now has everybody in the water department linking in with the safety net, because as people come in with water problems, a lot of times there are a lot of things going on in their lives besides their water bill that people need help for.
And that gets to the bigger poverty question in the city, which you didn't create, of course. You inherited that along with a lot of other issues. What are the answers to that? I mean, especially sitting from your chair.
Yeah, so jobs, training so that the people here have skills to get the jobs, school, so we start these kids having a real chance at a career. It includes things like Motor City Match that supports entrepreneurial startups that we're doing, but nothing. And you look at our summer jobs program, we had 5,600 young people who had a job last summer. We're going to have 8,000 this summer. It's not going to be one solution, Stephen. We're going to have to hit this from 10 different angles at once, and we're going to work really hard at it. But the way to get rid of poverty is opportunity, and we got to bring more opportunity to Detroit.
All right, since you brought it up, let's talk about Detroit Public Schools. The governor's plan has not advanced anywhere in Lansing right now. What are you hearing from your people in Lansing?
It's just the way this whole thing has gone is so frustrating. So you have two different questions. One is the financial problems of Detroit Public Schools. And there's no doubt since Jennifer Granholm appointed an emergency manager in 2009, the state's run up $700 million deficit, lost half of the enrollment in the schools. The state's got a financial responsibility, and I think almost everybody in Lansing now acknowledges that, even if they don't like it. That doesn't solve why people were leaving, which is the kids were not being educated in the classroom, which is a big part of why they left and a big part of why the city's in deficit. And what we propose on the Detroit Education Commission, to have a single authority here that takes responsibility for both public schools and charter schools, lays out standards that applies to everybody, gives parents choice and transportation, so you have 4 or 5 schools to choose from, even if your family doesn't have a car, grow the schools that are succeeding, give the schools that aren't an opportunity to correct themselves or close. There's got to be some local authority, because nobody cares as much about the children of Detroit as Detroiters do. We got to get back to local control of the schools.
How crucial of a piece is this for you in terms of timing, and when would you like to see something done?
It needs to be done now. And I spent a couple hours yesterday with the head of a major charter school network trying to convince them, because some of the biggest opponents are the charter school operators who don't want to have any authority kind of supervising them. But we're going to see if we can't strike a middle ground, and but it's been very frustrating how long it's taken.
Has the governor done enough to push this through in a timely way? We thought we'd see the bills now.
It hasn't been for a lack of effort. Now, whether it's been the right strategies in the right order is something that we can talk about, but he certainly tried.
Let's talk a little bit about neighborhood and talk about blight and I think the aggressive timeline that you've had with demolitions and getting down, 7,000
Well over 7,000 houses in the last 18 months.
Over a year, but you faced criticism in recent months about the way that it was done and the bidding process. How would you respond to that?
Well, the one thing I'm sure about is if you don't want to get criticized, don't try to do something. But we started out in May of 2014 and took over this program that was running at the rate of 25 demolitions a week, which would have taken 31 years to get the abandoned houses down that we have today. We said, let's dramatically ramp it up. We did a bid process in June of 14 where we put out some huge bids where people kind of bid based on the amount of space in the houses as opposed to detailed bids. That got a lot of houses down, but it created a lot of problems. So we didn't repeat that process. We have put them out ever since June of 14 in small individual packages that have been bid. We've been averaging 100 a week, 4 times what it's been. So we're continuing to get stories from the unit price bid in June of 14. There's some legitimate issues, but if we made a mistake, we made a mistake because people go into bed every night worrying if the vacant house next door was going to catch fire and spread to their house. And so we tried to speed up the process. We did speed up the process. We know a whole lot more today than we did in June of 14. But the criticism on the unit price contract in June of 14 hasn't been repeated since.
And some of the questions about that have to do with contractors who came in and helped set those prices and then got the work on the back end.
There's never been any secret about the process. So what we did was this. We knew what the average price of a house demolition was. And we had contractors who were doing 25 at a time. We were trying to get contractors to bring 30 and 40 pieces of equipment from other parts of the state and other states. And so we sat them down and we said, here's the average price we're paying today, 52 cents a cubic yard. If we were to give each of you 800 houses at 52 cents a cubic yard, the average price today, would you be interested in moving your equipment and doing this? And 4 people in the meeting said, we think we would. We went out for proposals. 3 of the 4 chose to do it. But there was never any secret. It was openly communicated to the state. The state understood what we were doing. And if you were looking back at it saying, how are you ever going to get people to move their equipment from other places and make a long-term commitment to Detroit if there wasn't going to be a large number at what we thought was a fair price?
But then the price, once they did the work, they came back with change orders.
No question
that
about
pushed the price much, much higher to levels that we hadn't seen before.
Well, actually, we saw even higher than that afterwards. But that's why we didn't repeat the process. So we were trying to figure out how do you take down, it ended up, we took down 1,400 extra houses in 5 months, which if you were in one of those neighborhoods where one of those 1,400 houses came down,
sure.
You're really pleased about it. But because we went so fast, there were change orders. The costs went up. The costs still weren't as high as they became 3 or 4 months later. Now they've come down to $14,000 a piece as we've gained some experience. But there's no question, Stephen, if I could rewind the clock, would we have done it differently? Yeah, but we hadn't tried it before. And so we were doing what we thought made sense at the time. We got a lot of houses down. When we saw the problems with it, including the change orders, we said, we're not doing it that way again. And we've never done a unit price contract since. But of course, you know the media in this town, they don't want to report from the fact that from July of 14 to today, we never repeated that process because it didn't work. They're covering this like we're continuing to do it. But that's the nature of the business. And
well, I think the questions that we're asking are about how this happened and whether, with the history of deals in this town, looks like the specter of corruption, of course, hangs over everything. It looks like things that we've seen in the past.
And so there's a whole thing. The state of Michigan signs off on everything we do. There's an email we sent to the state. We want to do this unit price contract, do a large number at a set price, the 52 cents a cubic yard. State says, great. We did talk to the contractors saying, are you guys going to be interested at 52 cents a cubic yard? Because if you're not going to be interested, we don't need to bother. It was what we were paying. It was the right thing to do. When we got interest, we went forward. Anybody who's ever dealt with unit price contracts in construction, and it's not an uncommon thing, knows this is how it works. There was never any secret about it. But as I say, we haven't used that process again since June of 14, so we've learned. And I won't tell you we've done anything perfect, but I will never criticize my staff for making a mistake trying to do too much. And if anything, they made mistakes trying to go too fast because of the condition of the neighborhoods.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about neighborhood stabilization and talk about really the tax base. You're looking at assessment of homes that are still very high, and you've got, what, about a 30% tax delinquency right about now. Talk to me about the timeline for getting some new assessments on properties in the city, and so more people are paying what they believe that their homes are really worth.
Well, our payments have gone up significantly the last 2 years. So we dropped the assessments in this town between 10 and 20% in February of 14 when I got here, another 10 and 20% in February of 15. We are running way ahead of budget in property tax collections this year because people are staying in their homes. And if you look at the sales data this year, we've got a dozen neighborhoods selling for 25% more than a year ago. And it's all the areas where we're doing the demolition. When you take down the one burned out house on a block, the other 19 houses on the block go up in value. So we're seeing neighborhoods where the property values are coming up. And so I think it's going the right direction. We're continuing to reassess the city citywide because there are neighborhoods where they haven't gone up, and we need to continue to make adjustments. But I think in this next year, you're going to see just the opposite. The sales data is going to show a lot of neighborhoods where property values went up.
You talked about a lot of successes over this past year and making sure that a lot of good things have happened. One thing I know that you were really working hard on was de-insurance.
Right.
Where does that stand right now?
You know, we're going to grind away till we get it done. And it is shameful what the healthcare companies have done. But if you go in today to get an MRI and you're on Medicare, the doctor and clinic are paid about $500. If you're on Blue Cross, they're paid $700 or $800. If you were hurt in a car accident and it's your car insurance, those doctors and hospitals and clinics are being paid $3,400 for that MRI. What is happening with no fault right now is a terrible thing. We have the highest car insurance in America, and if you don't buy it, you're a criminal. And we have criminalized a large number of Detroiters who have no choice but to drive without insurance to get to work. And so no fault is no choice. And that's what we're dealing with. We're pushing the bill. I do think we ultimately will get it through. And what we have proposed is say Detroiters can have a choice. You want to keep your $5,000 policy, you can. If you want a $3,400 policy, which will cover almost anything you could have in the hospital, but long term, we aren't paying those doctors $3,400. We're paying them the $700 on your Blue Cross or Obamacare or Medicaid. It's a fair arrangement. It'll bring down the cost by 30%. And ultimately, I think the fact that we're doing the right thing will prevail, but it's disappointing to see people that were my colleagues doing something they know is immoral.
When you were elected, you said that one of the things you wanted to be judged by at the end of 4 years, or the thing you wanted to be judged by at the end of 4 years, was whether the population was growing, which of course would require a reversal of a, I think, 60-year trend in the city. We're now at the end of year 2 of your administration. Do you want to hold to that measure?
Absolutely.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I believe it's already happening. But the only thing I think a mayor ought to be judged by is the population going up or is it going down? And there is a lag between people move in and the time the Census Bureau catches up.
Sure.
But we are keeping very close track of what's happening in the neighborhoods.
You think we've turned that corner already?
We certainly have bottomed out. But you know, 2 years ago, Dan Gilbert did a report that we had 80,000 houses in Detroit that needed to come down because they were vacant or on their way. That number is now down to 30,000. We are seeing people move into neighborhoods. You're seeing work being done in neighborhoods. I believe we've turned the corner. I'll let the Census Bureau give us the official statistics, but I look at residential utility hookups numbers every single month, and I do believe we're at an historic turning point, and I'm going to be judged on whether the population is going up or going down.
All right, Mayor Duggan, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.